Welcome. Oh no, I won't start with that. Thank you for the introduction. My name's Richard Vines, and I'm here with Kieran Murphy from Agriculture Victoria, which forms part of the Department of Economic Development, Jobs, Transport and Resources. And we've been asked to talk today about the challenges of integrating approaches to records and knowledge management from the perspective of a client-facing business unit. A little bit of context. Agriculture Victoria is involved with the major industries in sectors of grains, horticulture, dairy, red meat. Our department works in a state-based context, but also within a national framework as well. And Victoria is important because we produce about 29% of exports nationally from about 3% of the land. Now, I'm not going to talk much more about agriculture, but at the heart of it, we're very passionate about our agricultural industries. The nature of the talk that I'm giving today is got this idea of client-facing business unit, and for us, what does that actually mean? Well, on this slide, you can see that at the very centre of everything that we want to do is the importance of addressing the audience, what we call the audience-centric problem-solving sort of perspective. And the audience might be the citizen, the client. There's a number of ways in which you could describe the audience. And in our context, the important part about that is to wrap some sort of, we're a program management / project management organisation. And so we see that wrapping some sort of program management and service design framework around the way in which we address our audiences and work with our audiences and segment those audiences as fundamental to actually what being a client-facing business unit means. Now, I'm not suggesting at the moment we have this full rolled out program management framework in the what I'm talking about quite yet, but we're working on it. And we work on the basis that historically agriculture has had a very rich tradition in extension activities, and you can see in the slide here of the traditional ways that often agricultural extension has worked. So that's the sort of context about what a client-facing business unit means. So it was important for us to come to some sort of what we called a plain English version of knowledge management, and our executive director, who's been very supportive of this work, was keen to try and get some language around this matter. And after a period of time, we came up with this idea that knowledge management is about capturing, sharing and effectively using knowledge with the aim of continually improving it so people can make better decisions. And in the context of Agriculture Victoria, KM connects people to agricultural information and solutions using innovative technology and systems to help them collaborate, make better decisions more often, innovate, adapt, achieve their objectives, and to be better problem solvers. So that was the sort of language that we ended up agreeing that what we thought how we would work and describe ourselves in the department. Now, just context this presentation with an example of the sort of challenges that our department, and I would add most government departments face, and that is the pressure of providing timely information to stakeholders in very short periods of time. And here's an example of somebody in our department that received an email at 11:47 on Wednesday with a request for feedback by 10 a.m. And to make this brief and short, he's asked to provide a succinct summary of the profile of agricultural activities. For example, the dairy impacts for the Loddon and Campaspe region, issues related to intensification and the development of agribusiness facilitation model, issues for wineries and initiatives related to that industry, issues in relation to land use and urban encroachment. And when you receive something like that with that sort of time frame requirement, it's actually very, very difficult for departments to respond with authoritative information in that period of time, because our information is siloed and all over the place. So for example, with this person that received this, where do you start? We have a contract management interface which manages our projects. We have an evaluation and performance monitoring framework that manages the monitoring systems. We had shared hard drives. We have private hard drives. We do have a people search, but it's not connected to anything else, and so on. And so where does somebody like this start with that challenge? And as citizens, we would expect that the government is able to have visibility about everything that we do, but the reality is that it's very hard. So here's an example of the, if you like, the manifestation of the problem metaphor. We've got, this one slide is an archival room. It's not in our department. I'll put that up. And you can see that the information's just thrown, the analogue, the paper-based records are just thrown into a room and waiting for somebody to sort them out. You have a multiplicity of and a file tree structure on your hard drives and shared drives that are just all over the place with no coherence. So I think everybody in this room would clearly understand the nature of the challenge. So how do we, in our department, interpret this challenge at an audience-centric level? And so in our work, we take the view that without action, there is no knowledge. So everything is about trying to provide optimise evidence, if you like, for as decision support for people that are making decisions out in highly distributed areas, on farms, in catchments, whatever the context may be. And so in making decisions, people make decisions in a multiplicity of ways, and one of the most important ways is just the daily, hourly and daily sense-making activities they engage in. Talking to people over fences, engaging with their expert providers to provide access advice, and so on. And then along comes a disease outbreak for a season, or there might be a flood. There's a seasonal disruption. And so where we are in our world, we need to think about how do you have some degree of memory about what happened, say, for example, 15 years ago in a wet season. So we have to be able to provide and optimise evidence for action at that sort of seasonal disruption level. And then, of course, at the program level, we might have investments that last anywhere between 6 months and 7 years. I've got 2 to 5 years on the slide, but it could be any of that period of time. And so how do we actually create systems that allows the ability to optimise the evidence developed through those programs to support action at highly localised contexts? And finally, of course, that flows into after the program level, where we start to build longitudinal data sets that span many generations, and they become extremely valuable. And how do you optimise those? And just recently, for example, Kieran and I were in the United States, and we saw this challenge of longitudinal data sets very right in our faces, if you like, because we came across the Morrow plots at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where this is America's oldest experimental field trials, established in 1876. So they have trials going back that far to support decision support activities in their agricultural communities. And we need to manage this evidence in very highly systematic ways. So what is our roadmap to do this? Well, what we've chosen to do is to work across a number of different platforms, if you like. So social media is a platform that we all need to engage, and that supports sense-making, the more here and now exchange of stories and information that's real time, if you like. But we need to embed that also within our social learning and collaboration systems. And we've invested in a platform that is to support the activities of what we call communities of practice, engaging with their identified communities of interest to work up and develop what we call these learning networks to help in the solving of problems where no one institution in their own and on their own can solve those problems on their own. And so we're interested in this collaboration across jurisdictions and across institutions in ways that allow people to create collaborative content and with being authorised by their departments or their businesses. And by the way, this can go across the public, the private, the education and the community sector, where we've got mixed governance models to support this. This is this social learning system and platform, which I'll show to you briefly in a moment. We've also invested in this knowledge space mapping and this idea of collections management to support the management of evidence, if you like. We call this our KCT. KCT stands for the Knowledge Curation Tool. And this is about trying to provide those access to collections and data assets to these learning communities so that they are able to access this evidence from previous works over long periods of time. And we have to also think forward about how we describe these spaces, the glossaries of terms used to do work in these collaboration frameworks. And so when farmers make decisions, they sense make, we all sense make. That happens at an hourly, daily, weekly level. They talk to over the fence, they meet people in the street. Increasingly Twitter feeds and Facebook is a way of sense making, etc. Along comes a disease outbreak for a year as at a seasonal level. Sometimes those outbreaks or wet seasons won't repeat themselves for 10, 12, 15, 20 years. Where's the knowledge about how the industry deals with those seasonal disruptions? That's a challenge for us. And then we have these program investments that might only run from anywhere. I've got 2 to 5 years there. They might run from 6 months to 7 years. Flagship programs at the national level, usually if they're well conceived, at least run for 7 years. CRCs run for 7 years. And then we have this sort of long-term level. And what our challenge is in knowledge management and records management is to optimise this evidence for action, to actually provide decision support systems. And just to highlight this challenge of longitudinal data sets, Kieran and I were very fortunate to go to the US just recently, and here we are at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and we noticed that this is they've been having, this is the US's oldest experimental feed, established in 1876. At this university. And I'd love to take you on a journey about what we've learned about universities in the US and the historical importance of them. This is in a town of 100,000 people, and this university has a turnover of $6.4 billion. And these sort of buildings are just, there's square kilometres of these buildings. It's extraordinary. We were so lucky to see it. And these people are some of the best, most interesting people in the world. So this issue about optimising evidence for action, so we want to try and deal with that, picture that thing on the top there. So we have to work across the social media platforms, social learning and collaboration platforms, what we call this knowledge space mapping and managing evidence. Going forward, we also need to have some sort of agreement about the terms that are used in the sectors, and importantly, we have to work in the space of working across all of those spaces to support digital preservation. And we're almost nowhere in that space, but we're actually targeting it as something that's really important. And so we're very pleased to be able to open up conversations with ANZ, Data.Vic, Public Records Office, etc., because we see the long-term preservation issues as absolutely fundamental. So if there's anything that you come out of this conversation is that we want to we'll work with everybody to try and get better understanding of how we manage our cultural and social assets for the long term. So I'm now going to just go into some tools and show you 2 tools that we've developed to support that. And I just want to highlight, maybe I'll go back to this slide here briefly before I do. is that I'm going to show you one tool which is in this life race, what we've called life race space, and this one here which is called the EMMA/KCT space. So just I'll tell you when we flip between them, but just a little bit of context. This life ray application is and Kieran's been leading this work with the Rural Industries Research and Development Corporation, and we were fortunate enough to work with the US Cooperative Extension System in the US, and just briefly, they have pioneered an approach to communities of practice, engaging with communities of interest to create learning networks. So imagine our scientists, our development specialists, in inverted commas, the professionals engaging with the farmers, the end users who have huge amounts of knowledge that has to be respected. So it's not an expert client relationship, in my opinion, it's not. And they've developed this methodology around creating these communities of practice. And we, in a sense, emulated that. And this is just an example of the animal manure management homepage of their, this is a national community of practice that they've established. And you can see that this is the site that has all of these resources of information available to, for example, in Australia, to allow people to work across jurisdictions. And so in our case, we piloted this with the Grains Research and Development Corporation. And so this is the example of the new crop nutrition program collaboration platform. Now, you can't really get a good sense of this, but essentially it allows scientists from New South Wales, Victoria and across the country to collaborate. In the crop nutrition funding program, it's $35 million program. It has 100 research scientists working in it. And there's a whole lot of sub-programs and so on. So this particular site, in principle what it does is it creates a framework to support social media, but it also creates the opportunity of people to develop collaborative content across both the private sector and the public sector. So for example, you can see here, I'm hoping I can see here that, is it? So Roger Armstrong is one of our soil scientists in Horsham, so he's created some content here. On the same site, Jeff Crack from Fertiliser Australia, which is a private sector consortium, working collaboratively to support the engagement with those communities. So you can see embedded in this idea is cross-institutional / cross-jurisdictional collaboration, and that's a really, really important thing because it allows people to publish content that's highly targeted without actually having to go through the comms departments of various departments to do that. So they're authorised to actually create content. So that's the collaboration platform that the first one that I showed you. So but these people create content, but they also, you know, in crop nutrition, there's sort of 100 years of research history in Australia in that space. So how do you provide the evidence base to those communities? And that's the challenge that we started to face. So how do you make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, that a program that was funded 15 years ago in Queensland actually has something to say here, and that we're not wasting public sector investment funds in redoing something? So that's a problem that we started to look at, and that's the subject of, we've only just started this journey, but let me highlight some of the what we've actually started to do. So I'm now jumped over from the LifeRay collaboration platform now into another platform called this, what we've not quite sure what we're still going to call it, but this is what we actually received the award for, which is the EMMA/KCT tool. And you can see here that forgive me, I've got the wrong screen up here. I'm just going to go back in here and open one more screen.
Richard, what does EMMA stand for?
Well, some time ago it stood for the Enhanced Metadata Management Application. Yeah. But there's a bit of a story of all of this, and so Now, why is that not coming up? Yeah, here we go. So this is just the screen of the inputs, data input screen, and so I just want to, I'm going to be as quick as I can, but somebody's got to keep me honest. How much longer have I got?
10.
Okay. So up here on this screen or up the top, you can see that there's this thing called the curation view and the concepts and creators view and the registry system. The thing that distinguishes this tool from, say, just a traditional library bibliographic system is that we're interested in the knowledge space of within which records are created. And so we've had a collaboration with the eScholarship Research Centre at the University of Melbourne for a number of years, who've been involved with negotiating the standards under one particular standard that underpins this platform, and it's sort of an archival description standard. And we have been very interested in how you inject knowledge management practices into the archival description world. And this is not something, I haven't got time to go into it, but this is not an area that government receives advice about through its normal procurement strategies through vendor-based systems. And so we've had a real challenge in actually saying and charting the journey that we actually needed a new source of expertise to advise us in this space. And essentially what we're interested in, a couple of things, but is, you know, we've had 3 machinery of government changes since I joined the department. And we're interested in how ensuring that the knowledge created and let's call it explicit knowledge objects, created in the life of the program, the life of a department, aren't orphaned every time there's a machinery of government change. And that's a really big challenge to deal with. So concepts and creators are the sort of archival description world. So to give you an example of this, a concept and creator can be a program of work, it can be a project, it can be a sector, it can be an organisation. And so we start to name these entities in there. We create Dairy Australia as an entity. And if we scroll down here, we can see that Dairy Australia is listed here. It has a brief description, basic identity information that you know all about. The date exists. We can go up into the ABR, Australian Business Register, and get a historical date on which that time was created. This is an evidence-based tool. It's not something you just make up out of willy-nilly. So, for example, if you put in a strategy or let's say a concept here as an example, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is say fertiliser management. If in a program interface, in a program management framework, if you're wanting to get behaviour change in the area of fertiliser management, then you really need to define that as a concept in here in the system with attached to the evidence base and the sort of negotiated agreements about what that actually means for that particular project. I hope you're with me with this. So in terms of concepts and creators. And then on the other side, we have this sort of collections view, and here's an example of a particular program called the Project 3030 project, which was a project that went from 2004 to 2011, and when it finished, this story is repeated across the country. When the program finishes, all the resources are distributed in people's cupboards and hard drives, etc. And you know, we all have almost no public records compliance. The fact is that, you know, in this space, there's very challenging requirements around public records compliance. But so here's a homegrown forage, is a collection that was created as part of the Project 3030 program, and here's a description of the collection. We start at the collection level first. We don't start at the resource level first. And then when there's a demand, we might describe the particular resources. And you can see down here that this particular resource has been described. It has a date created, it has basic minimum metadata, and you can then access that into a repository. Now, this particular application is not a repository. We've got huge issues around actually developing sustainable, persistent repositories, and we'd love to see that become as an area of discussion for the future of how the public service restores information, etc., etc. So there's a collections management approach, then there's the concepts and creators approach, and then you can start creating relationship types. So let's just, before I actually show you the benefit of this, let's go into, say, a concept called program, and oh no, let's call it, I'm making this up on the spot, I hope I'm going to pick the right one. So we're going to say the Dairy Knowledge Management Project, which existed from 2000, this is the current project, and it's from 2016 to 2019. And down here you can start to see that you can actually create a relationship. So if I wanted to actually add a relationship to say that this particular program was related to something else, let's say we want to relate it to a committee, and we want to relate it to the Dairy Moving Forward Committee. So we select that, and we can see you can start to describe the relationship type in that field there. So it gives you the option of describing those relationship types. And by the way, just recently the International Council of Archives has just published a thing called the Expert Working Group on Archival Description or something, and it's a fantastic piece of work. I think it's a groundbreaking piece of work. You should go and look it up, and it has a dictionary of relationship types, which is this whole platform is built on. So relationship types is something that we're going to be beginning to work with. And so what's the benefit of all of this? Why is this useful to a client-facing business unit? Well, one example is, let me just now try and find the right screen. I think, yeah, here. If I go into this screen, this is a strategic view. So to go back to Michael's problem that he got a request on Wednesday afternoon, and by Thursday he had to respond upwards to the minister. Well, this is the sort of, you just use your imagination to unpack what this might be possible for this. This is only one view of what's possible. So you can say there's the Victorian dairy sector. The Dairy Moving Forward strategy is part of the National Dairy Industry Strategy. Forgive this, there's a rendering problem, so you can see that we've still got a long way to go to begin to really make this hum. But you can sort of say there's the summary of the Dairy Moving Forward strategy. It was started on this date, and sometimes it ends on another date. So you have, I haven't got, actually that hasn't got a date in there, so that's my problem. But you know, you can see it's got a start date and it's got an end date. And by the way, it's also related to the National Primary Industries Research and Development program or framework. And let me just show you what that means. So National Primary Industries, mightn't have time, okay, good. Thanks for keeping me honest. So then you can say, okay, well, show me the projects related to dairy moving forward. You can see dairy knowledge management from 2013 to 2016. You can see the previous one that went from, that's the previous one. And then you can say, well, show me the collections developed by that particular program, and then show me the resources that relate to that. And you can go on and say, yeah, and there are the regions, and these are the people, and you can do facet management any way you like. You get what I mean. So that's the KCT tool, and so I'm now going to step back into my slides and just finish off here, because you can... Oh yeah, no, of course. Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Kieran.
Third slide, third one across. Again. Next one.
Okay, so now imagine the collaboration space, that slide that I showed you, and then the records evidence space. What I'm showing you here is the interface of those two. So behind it is this, behind this website is a collaboration space that can be created online in 5-10 minutes for a particular learning community. And then you can actually create what we call this widget function that actually says, well, actually show me all the resources that exist at the basic agronomy level that our department has. And there you are. I'll look at this one. And by the way, well, you can see you can click straight through to the resource. I won't go there, but you can see what I mean. You're actually interfacing.
Maybe try the concept where you show fertiliser.
Okay, so.
Concept.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, cool. Good. Here's the, Kieran's reminding me in very excellent way that I just want to highlight this because this is something I'll say in just a moment. These are the practice areas that this particular program have identified that they realise that if they're having this investment over a 5-10 year period, these are the critical areas where some sort of behavioural change is required to deliver some sort of public impact. And so you can, I showed you in KCT how you can create those as concepts, and then you can actually start attaching evidence to those concepts, and then you can start doing queries based on, you can sort all your information about all your different practice chains. So now imagine if you had 100 projects in here and the DepSec asks you, you know, what are we doing in sort of forage management in Gippsland? Well, you know, we can do it pretty quickly if we've got good metadata. If we've got good metadata. So thank you very much, Kieran. Now I'm going to go back to my slides. And I'm going to try and zoom on to finish up. How am I going? Another 5 minutes, isn't it? Is that right? Yeah. So I've showed you two tools. Now, briefly, I don't want to overwhelm you here because actually we're overwhelmed almost every day. We don't want to share our pain because it's too hard. But this is our audience-centric. We try and make sure we never lose sight of our audience. But then we wrap a program management framework around it. And the sort of things that we've had to deal with these issues. If we could quarantine ourselves off, we would, but we can't. And so we've had to deal with learning networks up above, and Kieran's pioneering a national learning network system, and we really want to support people to understand that we've got to get some really important governance issues sorted out. That includes this whole obligation and responsibility around managing our public records. We have a collections development and preservation initiative, which I've partially showed you. It's much bigger than what I've showed you, but you can see a bit of it. We've actually today or yesterday, the government announced an animal intensification strategy. So we're actually involved now in regulatory burden mapping, where we're looking at using KCT to actually map the regulation framework of animal intensification so that a citizen can go in and say, I want to build a feed pad in this location, show me all the permits that I need to do that, and then start me engaging in the service system to do that. This is onerous. And you know, et cetera, and we've our dairy team's done some fantastic building of tools to what I call as evidence-informed decision making. So that's our sort of way of thinking, but we haven't actually made that institutional yet. So conclusions. You know, the client-facing business unit, we have to be in the space now of agriculture intensification. Huge social licence issues in that space. What are some of our conclusions? Well, in a client-facing business unit doing records and knowledge management, if you downplay the importance of social learning, I reckon you do that at your peril. So, you know, you can't get too excited about metadata to start with. You've actually got to talk with people, and there's been a long journey with us, and we've got a long, long way to go. The second conclusion that I'd make is that capturing of records metadata needs to be useful for those that create the records. And, you know, I learnt that really powerfully in the community services sector, where social workers are working with families, you know, at risk. And, you know, the way in which those data systems were structured was just there was no incentive to deliver value to the people that do it. So we think we're getting there with that. The third one is that we think that focusing on impact monitoring systems offers a potential way of becoming useful. And so I've identified those practice areas as concept entities defined in our knowledge curation tool with evidence attached to them as to that, you know, that from a hand on heart we can say, yeah, a public investment in that practice area is a high priority. And we can monitor the impact, monitor the impact of that. Now that's where we probably need to go in the next 12 to 24 months, get a few people start doing this. And by the way, we can, you know, make it regional or audience or expertise centric, etc. And we have to, you know, at the end of the day, we've always felt, well, somebody else is going to come along and help us with this. You know, this is just too hard. But there ain't anybody else. It's just us. Yeah, it's just you. We have to create the vision. And so what we're doing is trying to put these collaboration spaces and connect them to these preservation spaces. And we've got such a long way to go with that. And I just want to highlight here that we've been so grateful to Chris Kirk, who's in the room, who helped build our KCT tool. And I'll just quickly refer to that here. It's a little bit of a big ask to go into this slide in some detail, but underpinning this, Chris has designed a database and an API system that it doesn't really matter. It's only interested in capturing various types of metadata that can be deployed out into any sort of client environment. So the knowledge curation tool that I showed you is just one type of client. There might be all sorts of other clients. And so we've only got one. We've done an investment and got an award for that knowledge curation tool, but this is a much bigger landscape. This content deployment area is important. So to finish, we went to the US. We've started to establish relationships with ANZ, the RDA, the Public Records Office, Agriculture Victoria, with the University of Melbourne, and we are indebted to the university for their support with this. We're just sharing this. We think that there's a real public imperative to collaborate around this compliance around records and evidence, not for records and evidence for sake, but because we're a knowledge-based society. So I think I'll finish there. I'll just acknowledge Kieran, I'll acknowledge Chris.
I'll do it here, Richard.
Yeah.
So you can see,